Well, actually, there was 762 and 763. One of Marty Miller's favorite combinations here. We finished 762 and just go into the chorus of 763. They kind of says to do that. That's what we do, I think. Because right at the end of 762, optional segue to there is coming a day when no heartache shall come, nor more clouds in the sky, nor more tears to dim the eye. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day, when my Jesus Christ shall be, and the moon upon his face. What a day, no sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day, that I breathe Jesus out to me, and the moon upon his
One of my favorite characters in the Bible, other than the Lord Jesus, is David. I've spent a good deal of time going back through his life, reading the Psalms, trying to understand the man. And so we're going to look at a series tonight, or start a series tonight that has to do with David, King David. Okay, and David. First mention that we have of David actually is back in the book of Ruth, where we read these words. Where Naomi took the child that was of Boaz and Ruth, and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it. And the woman, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, which is the father of David. So we have this lineage, this wonderful lineage of Boaz and Ruth. And then from Boaz to Ruth, we have Obed, and then Obed to Jesse, then Jesse to David. And it goes to show you that we Boaz and Ruth, I don't believe, were around when David was anointed. I'm just guessing that that's probably what happened. But they could never have imagined that union and their godly influence and how that would play out a generation beyond their sight. And if we could take anything tonight, maybe that would be part of it for us, especially we have children, and then ultimately, God willing, we have grandchildren. Our best hope for the generations to come is what we do today, what we're doing right now. And, focusing on just doing the best we can with what God has given us, and then go from there. So, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 16 tonight. I have the text in the handout tonight. But I want to kind of get into... And there's no guarantees. I've been at this long enough, you've seen it long enough. There's no way that you can just push buttons and hope all your kids just turn out right. It just doesn't happen. Look back at Kyle just at that moment in case you were wondering. Okay, and
okay, we're even. Okay, we're even.
And many, you just kind of hit with things and see things, and you do the best you can, and you have to leave it to God and the decisions that our kids make. Sometimes we have to just trust God to do what no one else can do, and all we can do is just give it to God and just let it play out. And because every one of us has a responsibility, and our children do too, and none of us are going to be able to stand before God and make an excuse of, I would have followed you better, but every one of us have the ability to follow God, and it's in the heart. And I'd like for us, as we look at David, I'm not saying that we're gonna come up with this wonderful formula of how to create Davids in the world. Just that David in his life affected this heart that he had for God, because God says David had a heart like unto his, a heart after him. And there's that idea of I have written even in my Bible, heart after God, one must be after God. If someone is going to have a heart after God, they have to be after God. It's not eating right and just reading your Bible every day and going to church every Sunday. There has to be a room, and all of us here at Websterville and what we try to do through the school, whatever we're doing, we're trying to bring something that we hope will entice the heart to say, yes, I'm for God. And so let's just kind of begin with some preface here, some preparatory work, the location called Nurture versus Nature. We are who we are by how we've been made. We are who we are through our experiences, through the nurturing process. And for some it's good, and for some it's not so good. I've met some people who I think are nurturing, and yet they went on to do some really amazing things. And how does that all happen? How people look at life, and thus how they respond to things. And we see a lot of that play out in classrooms. All right? And that's why it's in some areas where you have all these worldviews and all these concepts, and just imagine a world like we live in today where everyone's doing, a lot of people are doing, not everybody, but to do what's right in their eyes. And if that means, chucking a piece of paper across the room, or standing on their desk, or running around and screaming and hollering, guess what? That came from somewhere, and it wasn't just their nature. There's some nurturing going on in their life experience that brings that about. And if ever you want to have a real exciting, eye-opening experience, just kind of go over to Little Flock every once in a while, okay? And you walk in and you're just like, oh, it's one of those days, huh?
But when you walked in today, it was.
Yeah, right. I think I was looking at other things. I probably should have noticed that better today. We had some visitors today that came down from Irisburg. They're considering starting a Christian school up there.
Cool.
And so they wanted to come down here. And here, let's just give you a case in point. The pastor there who's leading this, they can remember 35 years ago being here and enjoying fellowship, because they had a Christian school up there years ago they no longer have, that he attended. And now he's the pastor up there, and they want to start a Christian school now. And then he walks into this building, and he and one of his elders was with him today, who also went to the same school years and years ago. And they both were here at the same time 35 years ago. And they said it's been 35 years since we walked into this building. But we remember having all of these get-togethers with the other Christian schools in the state. And so and then they went down and saw Miss Ricker, and they started to rehash some of those old experiences. And don't tell her I said old, but but the fact is that that it's interesting how you never know how these things will play out, and how you might have an influence in somebody's life, and they felt like, and that they wanted to come and check out Websterville to kind of get an idea how to proceed forward. So among educators, the discussion of nature and nurture often comes up. We analyze this. We look at why is it a student one day could be just fabulous, and then the next day just kind of like, what happened to that student, right? We just don't know what happened, and ultimately we kind of go to, okay, did anything happen around here, especially when we're dealing with junior and senior high? Did anything happen around here that could have triggered some sort of response, and what's going on there that's happened? Or is there something going on at home that we need to know about, and see if we can rectify it that way? We're just constantly looking at how can we nurture, and then help when there's nurturing going on, and that nurturing may be good or bad, and then see if we can't bring the two together, stimulate them to take the next step in faith towards God. So because God is the creator, specific plan. So part of that is he chooses the place, the period, the parents. He even will allow certain problems to come into a person's life to help this idea of nature and nurture, okay, to bring about some change. So we are who we are by our nature, that's our DNA, and we are who we are by our nurturing. And there are no mistakes with God, okay? We know people who've had some really bad upbringing, but they turn out to be really godly people. And so how does that happen? That happens because someone took responsibility. They made choices, and and the consequences that go with it. The other side of that soul, the consequences for it, okay? And I try to very carefully, because we live in a day and age where everybody wants to blame everybody else. I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. That will be unacceptable before God, okay? It's just how we are, and we leave it to God to bring us to where we need to be. So David's history begins generations before he ever comes on the scene. We have this situation that we just talked about with Boaz and Ruth, and they made some really good choices. Okay, and those good choices, it was generations before. And that's why even simple decisions that we make today, although they may not seem that big of a deal, but I'm sure Boaz was really thrilled to marry Ruth, and Ruth was thrilled to be able to marry Boaz, and they produce a child, and Naomi's excited, and all this. But just think about both their lives before they come together. He just made good choices, but there just hasn't been a bride for him. Naomi was making good choices, the best that she knew how, following her husband, who happened to lead them to Moab, and she could never have foreseen that her husband and her sons would die there. And then she's trying to help her daughter-in-laws to make good choices, but it wasn't good advice. One accepted it, and the other, Ruth, says, no, I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to go with you. And so Ruth makes a choice.
It seems like Naomi must have a powerful influence upon Ruth.
Yeah.
Her good testimony.
Exactly. And that's what we're talking about, even as we're examining this even tonight, is that, our testimony can influence hearts, can influence direction. But it's really the person who's going to make the choice. They're going to make the choice which way they want to go. Ruth. There's no one there to protect and help. And so we go back into the economy of the day. Remember, there's been a famine in a way over in Moab that's caused a lot of problems. So there must have been some effect even in Israel. And in those days, women, they had far less rights than than we see in other places of the world. But they just didn't have anything there to protect them, for them to be able to get jobs. Remember, Ruth had to go out into the fields and get whatever fell on the ground. That was going to be what sustained them. And God has mercy on this situation, and Boaz catches Ruth doing this, and he makes good choices. I find it really interesting that one of the first things he does is says, you let her get whatever she wants. Shows his mercy, shows his kindness. And then he says to the men, basically he says, if any of you touch her, You know, you're going to be finding employment somewhere else. I mean, it was really, you know, he was saying, you know, obviously he was a goodly to look on, and he had young men working in the fields, and he was like, but he knew that they could be pretty bad, some of them, and he said, I'm just putting a warning out there, don't you touch her, you know. And so he makes good choices, and then Ruth is just trying to do what's right. Naomi says, you know what, he's our kinsman redeemer. But there's someone else in line, and so this is what's got to happen, and the whole process eventually goes where Boaz takes Ruth as his wife. Choices. David is benefiting from those good choices. So we may never see where these choices go. We just have to make good choices. And we hope that they'll have a positive effect down the road. Okay? So let's get to our text here a little bit. David's ancestry and heritage is a molding factor in making him who he is. But God's designation for him in the family order is something that should not be overlooked. David is the youngest, and I've often said even God chooses the pecking order in the home. Right? What if David were the oldest? What if David were the middle child, the middle son? Well, we know David was the youngest. Did that have an impact on some things? I believe it wholeheartedly did. Personally, it helped him to build confidence. Who was always beating him up? Probably his older brothers. Younger brothers, and with the older brothers, what do they usually do? They sometimes do things right on purpose just to get their older brother riled. You know, what courage? You know, is that in Eliab, who's the oldest? We hear his words later on in 1 Samuel. He says, "I know thy mischievousness. Why are you here?" You know, so I think Eliab was really giving a, and so he's like, "What are you doing here? You know, you're just mischievous. What are you up to? You're up to no good." And that was his testimony before his oldest brother. So that tells me something about when we're around young people. Usually the ones that we want to put them in little boxes and make sure they stay there nice and safe because we can control the issue. Probably the best leaders. They're tracked. Okay? And so our text. And it came to pass when they were come that he looked unto Eliab and said, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." And you know the picture here. We have Samuel who has been told by God, stop mourning over Saul. I already found somebody who has a heart after mine. Go down to Jesse's home, and you're going to anoint the new king there. And so Samuel goes down, has Jesse bring his sons. Jesse only brings 7 of them, not the 8th. He assumes David's too young, something like that. I don't know. He starts with Eliab, which is the oldest. He says, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said unto Samuel, "Look not on his countenance or in the height of his stature, because I have refused him on the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither hath the Lord chosen this." Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, "Neither hath the Lord chosen this." Now, might I just say, these were not unworthy men. These men produced children, David's nephews, who are in David's inner council, mighty warriors. His nephews were among his closest allies and helped him many times in battle, one saving his life many years later. So these are not unworthy men. They have raised very worthy men, okay? But they're not what God's looking for. All right, so again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, "The Lord hath not chosen these." And Samuel said unto Jesse, can you imagine this? Samuel's there and he's saying, okay, here's his sons, I've anointed them. I know I got it right. God said to come here and anoint. I've anointed all the sons, and God says, no. Or I give up. Or, you know what, let's go back through the 7 again. Maybe I missed it. No, but Samuel has this relationship with God enough to know that, okay, I know I heard God right. This is what God said to do. It didn't quite turn out the way that I thought it was going to. Jesse, perchance, is there another son somewhere? Oh, Jesse kind of says, oh yeah. He says, are here all thy children? He said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth. What an awkward moment. I can just imagine Samuel just kind of saying, yeah, you better go get him. I'm just going to sit down till y'all get back. Now, we don't know how far out he had to go to get him. I don't know. Was he out back? Was he a couple acres away? I don't know. But obviously nothing was moving until David shows up. And he sent and brought him in, and now he was ruddy with all of a beautiful countenance, goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. So he had a real good. Okay, so let's talk about David's heart. Thus we see David's heart was different than his brothers. God emphasized heart above countenance and stature. God, very, very delicate. And I'm going to be honest, men and ladies, can I just say this? I've said it before, but this is a good place to remind men. Men, we are usually pretty weak-hearted. We think we're the bold warrior type. No, we're probably not as stout as we think we are. All right. There was a reason, as you recall, that God said to Joshua about be strong, be courageous. The word courageous. So when someone's courageous, they have heart. Okay, and so men tend, and he says that I've never seen him say that to women anywhere in the Bible. Never. He's always said it to men, which is indicative of the fact that men take things that they're vulnerable in that heart area. And so as fathers or as grandfathers, I would suggest men, we need to understand that and cultivate that. Wives, be careful how you affect the heart. Okay. And so David has this heart. It is, in my opinion, that David's placement in the birth order contributed to the development of his heart. It is the hypothesis, then, that making right choices is difficult, and difficulty contributes to the formation of the heart. Here, we're now into, later on in verse 26, and David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that approached from Israel? For who is the uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to that man that killeth him. And Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom? Sheep. Why didn't you just say sheep? He's trying to put him down. This is a put down. You're irresponsible. You're nothing like us. We're out here men of war, and you just have a few sheep. All right. Now let's just talk. All right. We like the pecking order thing. Okay. Speaking of pecking, that's what it sounded like. Good timing on that, Faith. All right. Right on cue. All right. Now, with that, one of the things when we're around young men, it's formulated. It's usually in put downs. Okay. In the of who's going to be in charge. It's a competition. It's a I'm in charge. I'm going to take over. You're going to do what I want to. And so there begins this process. And so what do you think if you're the youngest and you have 6 other, and what do you think would happen in time given the right circumstances and the best choices? How would a young man under that pecking order, if we can try to in light of what we know David becomes, how could that have affected David? Number one, we talked about he would have to be courageous. I mean, he's constantly being picked on. And it's something that his other brothers, he gets tired of it. Leave me alone! Blah, blah. And he does. I mean, I don't blame him half the time. And he's just a kid. He's the only way he knows how to fight back when kids are abusing that situation is, get out of my face! And he'll say things, I hate you! Well, that's how he doesn't know how else to push him back, right? And his brothers are just being boys, yes, immature and ignorant, but they're doing the wrong thing. And so to me, he just has to go through it. And I'm like, what? Where did that thinking come from, right? So,
I think it also would make him maybe not take what people say to him or about him to heart. You know, he's going to have to learn to let things go and not dwell on it, I would think.
yes.
Maybe I'm not wording what I'm trying to think.
Well, that's good for a Sunday school lesson.
Well, and I was going to say, along that vein, that he had to look somewhere outside the family for his own self-identity. So he could have listened to them, or he could have looked to God for who he is.
Exactly, and that's exactly where we're going to go with this.
Cool.
So it's beautiful. That's exactly where we're going to go. At some point, his brothers are going to let him down, so he knows he can't quite trust that. In a way, I'm sure he had a decent relationship with Dad, but Dad seems to, be probably pretty busy. He's got to obviously manage at least a sheep farm, all right? And, and he may have overlooked some of this, maybe on purpose even. So he's not going to have this. And then he spent a lot of lonely time out with sheep, maybe thinking about it and putting it into a process of thought. So yeah, he's going to be very thoughtful. He's going to analyze a lot. He's going to be compassionate towards those that are in similar situations, isn't he? Because he's going to understand. He's going to understand what it's like to be oppressed or to have an injustice done to you because you're weak or you're low on the totem pole. So when he goes to the cave Adullam, who comes to him? Those that are in debt, those that are depressed, those that are discouraged, and he has to learn to shepherd them. An overcomer. There would probably come out of him this idea that, okay, my brother Shammah has come to me and he's going to come up with some creative, crafty way to make sure Shammah pays. You get what I'm saying? That's David. All right, that's what starts to cultivate here. And we might look at a young boy like that and say, what a brat, We might look at a young guy like that and say, man, he's so rebellious. We might jump to assumptions and conclusions about a young man, and yet we're calling it too early. We don't necessarily want to be the puppeteer and force this child, this young man, into an image that I think he should be. Let's let it go with the flow. Let's see where this goes, but let's build parameters and boundaries by which they're allowed to play, all right, and be who they're created to be. Now, I'm talking primarily of young men tonight. I'm not talking about young ladies, okay? I am talking about with men, and one of the reasons I think it's important to also just remind us tonight is that we live in a day and age where everybody wants to merge everything into one. So whether it's languages, whether it's business, whether it's this idea of unisexual activity, it always struck me wrong. Maybe it didn't strike you wrong, but it always struck me wrong. This idea that came out that men needed to find their feminine self inside.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And all I want to do is just scream, but it's not there because I'm not a woman, all right? I wasn't made that way, And so, but there's always those concepts, and it goes the other way. We look at young ladies today, and they all have the shaved heads, and I have to look twice. I'm like, I'm not sure, I went to the dentist office the other day, and a lady came in and had that kind of butch haircut. Yeah, what do you do, right? I don't know. It just gets confusing. And so there's a lot of confusion out there. And so David is emerging. And I want us to focus on the point that the trials here are he's making choices in these trials that are actually bringing him after God. Thus, he's getting a heart after. Eliab says, I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, what have I now done? I love it. I love the word of God. It gives you these things like, and there it is. He just was like, okay, Eliab, what have I now done? I don't ever get it right in your eyes. So what did I now do? Not a cause. Now we see this emergence of David's heart. And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered, he rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with that Philistine. Whew. Now, how old is David right now? He's not much older than 16 or 17, probably. How many?
How old are you, Jim?
About 12. Yeah.
I didn't know.
But so he's only 4 years older than you, maybe, and he's taking on Goliath. Amazing.
We were talking about David this morning, Jim and I.
He had another 4 feet. Goliath is about this tall. You know, he's about 10 feet. So
Almost like Ari.
So here we are, and this guy says, I'll handle him. But remember what has happened in David's life to give him the confidence to face Goliath. What's already happened? Well, he had his brothers, and those brothers prepared him for what would come next. What was the next thing we know in David's life? He just alludes to it with Saul. He says to Saul, we don't have the text here before, you can read it later. He says to Saul, he says, I fought a lion and a bear. What is this heathen Philistine to me? In other words, he's nothing. I fought a lion and a bear. Now, if I could have fought a lion and a bear, I could take anyone on. And if I have the God with me on this, I'm not losing this battle. We got it. Right? So, that's kind of where this goes. So, based upon the known history of David's younger years, I'm suggesting that it was balanced, but with much difficulty. Alone with the sheep day and night, this young man probably practiced music, slinging stones at trees. Oh, he probably was slinging stones at trees. Probably got pretty good at it. Probably got real confident that he could put that, with God's help, he could put that stone right where it needs to go.
Yeah, I know a friend that shot a bolt right into a tree.
Right into the forehead. That's where the stone goes, okay? And we're told that he was not as good as the Benjamites. The Benjamites could do it with either hand. That's how good they were with a sling. But he's probably feeling like, by God's grace, he can do this with the sling. So, the teasing, the wrestling with brothers might have prepared him for bears and lions. Through the fears and tears, David made the choice to seek God. And that's what I'm getting to. I am sure he went off after his brothers had pounded him or teased him, took him to the Lord. And in those quiet moments, those times when he was out playing or singing, it was unto the Lord. Guess who's noticing all that? The Lord. The Lord. So in our loneliness, even though we're in tears, you're not alone in it. God sees it. His heart was united with God. I want to jump down. There's more here that you could look at. But let's just go to the last page. Not the third page, but it would be the first, second, third, fifth page, I guess, technically. Okay? I just want to look at some of these verses that I think it reflects David's heart. Okay? Whether young, Solomon in all his wisdom, obviously the son of David, but writes this word in verse 3. Sorrow is better than laughter, for the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. With the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. It goes on to say, the heart of the wise is in the house. God on purpose will allow us to suffer some things to build heart. But we know those that have it real easy, and some of you kind of know what I'm talking about, tend to lean towards a feminine side. This is what he's talking about. It's okay. It's okay to let some of that happen. There's another term out there for parents today. Used to have what we called helicopter moms or helicopter parents. They're just Hoover. Right now we have what's called lawnmower parents, lawnmower moms. You say, well, what's the difference? Well, one is always over them, just kind of making sure everything is all right. The other now is like a lawnmower going out ahead of them, make sure there's no one when mom's not there anymore, or dad, and the obstacle comes. Meltdown.
See it every day.
You know, why is it that? And I'm not getting on one side or the other, but how many remember those images when President Trump was elected of college students? What were they doing? Screaming, curling up, crying, just their life was over. You know?
Like he fought like thousands of burgers.
So Psalm 108 is a psalm of David. Verse 1 says, "Oh God, my heart is fixed." It means established, it's set. No matter what, God, I'm set on you. I don't care how this goes, I don't know how this is going to turn out, I'm set. I'm fixed. I'm not moving. And by the way, I'm going to sing and give praise to you too. Boy, that's really good advice. No matter how it goes, I'll do it, but I'm not looking to rise up. I'm not going to do that. I'll just sit here and be content with whatever you give me. Psalm 18. By the way, this is a psalm, the servant of the Lord, he spake unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He says, "Then the channels of waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at thy rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of thy breath of thy nostrils. He," meaning God, "sent from above. He, God, took me. He, God, drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy and from them which hated me, for they were too strong for me." His heart fixed on God, understanding that, hey, he will be my strength. My favorite psalm it's my go-to. I always try to see if I can find another one of these life verses, and I'm always drawn back to Psalm 27. But in Psalm 27, verse 3, he says, "Even though a host would encamp around me," David would say, "I will not fear." What's he talking about? He's talking about, I'm going to wait on the Lord. I'm going to trust in the Lord. You see? So, he says, Psalm 38, "For in thee, O Lord, do I hope. Thou wilt hear, O Lord, my God. For in thee, O Lord, do I hope. Thou wilt hear, O Lord, my God." Some lessons that we can learn from the verses that we looked at earlier when he's being anointed. He must have been humble. He must have, or even what his brothers might have given him. By the way, I think Joseph was of the same caliber. He was also in a place where he was mistreated, obviously, but he did what his father gave him to do. He learned the difference between heart sick and heart alive, and he preferred to live it that way. He preferred to have his heart alive with God rather than sick. Can you imagine? How about if it was just hours before Samuel arrives, or they get set up, Jesse says, "Go out, I need you to go out and watch the sheep because your brother's going to be here." Then, how long does it take for Samuel to go along and anoint 7, or look at 7 guys and have God say, "No, no, 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 no"? Okay? So by the time David gets all the way out there, gets settled in, here comes someone running. "Dad wants you. Come on, hurry. Okay." In fact, Samuel come to town, everybody got worried. Samuel was one of those guys, when he come into town, they'd send out messengers that says, "Why are you here?" So Samuel's here, and David's like, and he says, "Sit down, you're going to be anointed king." Huh? He was obedient. He just did whatever. David learned the lesson of the last shall be first. He learned to believe, hope, trust, and follow God even when the odds were against him. And in so doing, he became King of Kings. Every king after him was measured in light of King David. Yeah. Every king after him was measured in light of King David. And when you begin to read, particularly the kings of Judah, even Hezekiah, who comes many years later, was after his father David. But others are not mentioned that way. Okay? They're not mentioned that way. The study of David is when he's running from Saul. Everywhere he goes, he thinks he's getting into a better spot, and it just gets worse again, and worse again, and worse again. And it's out of those situations what emerges. The Psalms. And so, what a powerful, powerful man. When he was right, everything was right. Sadly, he didn't finish well in the sense of that sin with Bathsheba, and it disrupted the whole apple cart after that. But he was a man after God's own heart. And even God said, except in the thing of Bathsheba, he was truly upright. Okay? So we're going to keep looking at David. All right? Any questions, comments? All right. Let's take some prayer requests tonight. To start us off, I'd like for us to be praying for Deli. Deli's still recuperating, but she just doesn't want to